Rolling into this moment, it feels like the ground in Detroit is shaking again, that same uneasy vibration we haven't felt since 2022, when the Lions were sitting at 1-6 and the fan base was split between belief and frustration. Back then, Sheila Hamp had to step in front of the cameras to steady the ship and reaffirm her trust in Brad Holmes and Dan Campbell. And now, here we are again, staring down a season that hasn't just stumbled, it has reopened wounds this fan base truly believed were healed. The conversation has changed, the tone has shifted, and suddenly, the space for criticism is wide open in a way that simply didn't exist a year ago. So stick with me, because today we're diving straight into this new chapter of Lions football. No filters, no sugarcoating, just the truth the fan base deserves. And before we get started, make sure to hit that like button to help push this video out to the entire Blue and Silver Nation. What's wild is that so many of us saw the warning signs long before the losses began stacking. Content creators, analysts, and die-hard fans who dared to question certain moves were labeled negative, fake fans, doom and gloom merchants. But now, when you scroll through the comments, when you talk to fans at Ford Field, when you look at the reactions across social media, the frustration has spread everywhere. And the reason is simple. The Detroit Lions, 5 years into the Brad Holmes and Dan Campbell era, suddenly look like a team regressing to old habits instead of building on hard-earned success. This season hasn't just been about losing games, it's about how they've been lost. It's the pattern, the lack of a consistent pass rush, the absence of Ben Johnson's influence, the repeated decisions to stay quiet at trade deadlines, the long list of injury-prone signings, the young players drafted with the hope of impact who haven't moved the needle, and then, out of nowhere, the gut punch that Frank Ragnow was returning from retirement only to fail his physical, leaving the team right back at square one on the offensive line. Add to that the Chicago Bears sitting 9-3 while Detroit fights to stay above water, and suddenly the NFC North has flipped upside down. The numbers don't lie, and they paint a picture fans can't ignore anymore. Through this point of the 2025 season, the Lions have beaten exactly one team with a winning record at the time they played them, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, back when they were 5-1. Every other win has come against teams sitting at .500 or below. And the losses? They're even more alarming, falling to the Chiefs when they were under .500, dropping a game to the Vikings when they were 3-4, nearly coughing up the matchup against the 2-9 Giants, and most recently, taking a punch to the gut at home against a Packers team that entered at 7-3-1. When you lay the schedule out from week 1 to now, it feels like someone is holding a mirror up to the franchise. A mirror that shows every flaw fans were told not to talk about. The inability to beat teams with winning records. The inconsistency on both sides of the ball. The uncomfortable truth that Brad Holmes, who built this team into NFC contenders just a year ago, may also have made decisions that are dragging Detroit backward just as quickly. And it forces us to confront a question no fan wants to ask. Not after everything we've celebrated, not after the NFC Championship run that felt like the beginning of a new era. Are the 2025 Detroit Lions frauds? Are we watching a team that climbed fast but wasn't ready to stay at the top? Are we looking at numbers that reflect who the Lions really are right now, not who we hope they are? The fan base isn't divided anymore, not between belief and criticism, but between denial and uncomfortable honesty. Because for the first time since Dan and Brad arrived, it's not out of bounds to question them. It's not out of bounds to wonder what happens if your 6 ends without real postseason success. It's not out of bounds to ask whether this project is drifting off course. So let me ask you directly, because this conversation belongs to all of us who live and breathe this team every week. Based on everything we've seen so far, do you believe the Lions are showing who they really are this season, or is there still time to prove the numbers wrong? Picking up right where we left off, the real weight of this season isn't just in the losses, it's in the gradual unraveling of the identity this team fought so hard to build. Because last year, the Lions walked into every stadium with a swagger that felt earned. They were physical, disciplined, creative, and fearless. They dictated games. They controlled momentum. They carried themselves like a team that had finally learned how to win consistently. But this year, almost everything that defined that rise has slipped, piece by piece, until now fans are left squinting at the field wondering where that version of the Lions went. When you watch these games back, it's not just that Detroit is losing to good teams, it's that they aren't imposing their will anymore. The pass rush, which was supposed to take a leap, hasn't consistently shown up. Opposing quarterbacks are too comfortable, too settled, hitting rhythm throws without being bothered. Aiden Hutchinson still fights on every snap, but without real help around him, offenses have figured out how to neutralize him. Meanwhile, the interior defensive line hasn't been the disruptive force it needed to be to mask the issues at the second level. And because there's no consistent pressure, the secondary finds itself in conflict snap after snap, covering longer than they should have to, being picked apart by quarterbacks who aren't under duress. That's not scheme, it's personnel. And it circles back to the same uncomfortable name fans keep repeating now, Brad Holmes. Holmes deserves credit for building a roster with heart and grit, for finding foundational players who helped shift the culture. But somewhere along the way, the aggressive edge that propelled Detroit upward dulled. Injured players were signed hoping they'd stay healthy. Draft picks were made on long-term potential instead of immediate impact. Opportunities to swing for proven help at the trade deadline were passed up while teams like the Packers and Rams made moves that changed their trajectory. The league doesn't wait for anyone, and right now, it looks like Detroit waited too long. It's not just the roster decisions either. The departure of Ben Johnson has proven to be more than just a coaching loss. It reshaped the entire offensive identity. Johnson had a way of understanding the rhythm of the game, knowing when to lean on the run, when to open up the playbook, when to simplify and when to attack. Without him, the offense has stretches where it looks predictable, hesitant, almost disconnected from the aggression that defined last year. There are flashes, moments where the unit shows what it's capable of, but flashes aren't enough when the bar was set so much higher. And then comes the emotional part of all of this. Because for Lions fans, frustration isn't new, but this specific kind of frustration is. It's not born from hopelessness, it's born from expectation. It's born from watching a team rise and believing they had finally turned the corner. It's born from seeing a window open and now wondering if that window is already beginning to close. That's what makes this moment so intense across the fan base. People aren't angry because they stopped caring. They're angry because they care more than ever. And through all of that, the conversation around Dan Campbell's future becomes complicated. Dan is the heartbeat of this franchise. His impact on the culture is undeniable, his connection to the players is real, and his leadership transformed this locker room. But the question fans are wrestling with now is whether Dan and Brad, together, can push this team to the next level, or whether philosophical differences, roster-building missteps, and performance trends are signaling something deeper. Nobody wants to imagine a separation. Nobody wants to picture another reset. But as the losses stack and the problems compound, those conversations surface naturally. And this time, they're not coming from the fringes, they're coming from the middle of the fan base. Looking ahead at the remaining schedule only reinforces the uncertainty. Dallas, Los Angeles, Chicago, these aren't just games, they're statements. And based on the pattern we've seen this year, Detroit hasn't handled these moments well. If the Lions finish the season 8-9, or even 9-8 without a playoff berth, it shifts everything about how this franchise is evaluated going into year 6. Extensions, job security, roster direction, timeline, all of it comes under the microscope. Yet here's the part that keeps this fan base from unraveling completely. This team has surprised us before. This team has gone from the bottom to the brink of a Super Bowl appearance. They've bounced back from worse than this. They've rebuilt themselves in ways the league didn't expect. And that's what makes the rest of this season so fascinating. Because if there's any organization in the NFL capable of taking all this frustration, all this doubt, all this bruised hope, and turning it into fuel, it's the Detroit Lions. But potential doesn't matter anymore. Belief doesn't matter anymore. Narratives don't matter anymore. Only one thing does: results, wins, statement games. Proof that this coaching staff and front office can adjust, adapt, and grow under pressure. Proof that last season wasn't an outlier, it was the foundation. So now it's your turn. After everything we've broken down, after every number and pattern and painful truth, where do you stand? Do you still believe this team can salvage the season and reestablish itself as a contender? Or do you think the problems run deeper than the record shows? Picking up the story exactly where we left it, the final stretch of this season feels like a crossroads for the entire franchise, not just for the players on the field, but for the front office, the coaching staff, and every fan who has invested emotion, time, and belief into this team. Because when a season reaches this point, when the numbers stop being a coincidence and start becoming a pattern, that's when an organization has to decide whether it's going to confront the truth or hope it fades on its own. And in Detroit, hope has never been enough. Not for this city, not for this fan base, not for a franchise that has been fighting for legitimacy for decades. The pressure surrounding these final matchups goes beyond wins and losses. They're tests of identity. Facing Dallas, Los Angeles, Pittsburgh, Minnesota, and Chicago will reveal exactly who the Lions are right now. Each game is a window into the soul of this team. Because it's one thing to talk about grit when everything's going well, but grit only means something when you're punched in the mouth and forced to respond. And right now, this roster is bruised. This coaching staff is questioned. This fan base is restless. Every snap, every decision, every drive speaks louder than the last. What makes the situation even heavier is that this isn't the same kind of losing Detroit has endured in the past. Those years had no expectations. Those seasons had no stakes. Fans were frustrated, sure, but they knew the team wasn't built to win. This year is different. This year feels like a team with the talent to compete, but not the execution to finish. A team that knows how to fight, but keeps running into the same walls again and again. And that's why every conversation in Detroit right now circles back to accountability. If Brad Holmes built this roster, and Dan Campbell leads it, then responsibility meets in the middle. Both men earned their extensions based on what they accomplished in year 3. But year 5? Year 5 is exposing decisions that set this team back more than anyone expected. Still, for all the disappointment and all the criticism, the beauty of football, and especially Lions football, is that nothing is final until the last whistle of the last week. Teams evolve, players rise, coaches adjust. Sometimes a season that feels lost takes a turn in the final month that reshapes everything. This team has done it before. They climbed out of a 1-6 hole in 2022. They stormed to the NFC Championship in 2023. They've shocked the league when no one believed they could. And even now, with the pressure building and the faith being tested, there's still a path forward. Not an easy one, not a guaranteed one, but a path. And let's be honest, Detroit doesn't fear hard roads. Hard roads are all this franchise has ever known. The question is whether this roster is willing to walk that road again, to dig deeper than they have all season, to fight like a team that's tired of being questioned, tired of being dismissed, tired of being labeled a fluke or a fraud, because that's what it comes down to now. How badly do they want to rewrite the narrative? How badly do they want to prove the numbers wrong? How badly do they want to show that last season wasn't their peak, it was the beginning? As we watch these next games unfold, we're not just watching football, we're watching the future of the franchise take shape in real time. We're watching how this coaching staff responds under pressure. We're watching how this front office evaluates its own decisions. And we're watching whether the players who became the heart of this team still carry that fire when everything is on the line. Sometimes, defining moments don't look dramatic in the moment. Sometimes, they're quiet. A third down stop, a fourth quarter drive, a choice to stay aggressive, a choice to trust your identity when the rest of the league doubts it. No matter what happens, one thing is certain. The final chapters of this season will tell us more about the real Detroit Lions than any preseason hype or midseason slump ever could. And when the dust settles, we'll all look back at this stretch, these games, these decisions, these reactions, and recognize them as turning points. Whether they're turning points toward resurgence or rebuilding depends on what the Lions do right now. And as we push deeper into this late season stretch, the tension surrounding every decision grows heavier, because this isn't just about the next snap or the next opponent. It's about whether this organization can steady itself before the ground gives way beneath it. You can feel it in the conversations happening across the fan base. You can feel it in every post-game reaction. You can feel it in the way Lions fans talk to each other now, with equal parts passion, frustration, and fear that the window they fought so hard to believe in might be narrowing faster than anyone expected. What makes this moment so compelling is that nothing happening right now exists in a vacuum. Every choice from the past 2 off-seasons is echoing through these games. Every player who was signed hoping to stay healthy. Every young piece drafted with expectations to produce early. Every free agent impact opportunity that slipped away. Detroit didn't collapse overnight. This has been a slow leak, and now the water is rising high enough that no one can pretend not to see it anymore. Still, there's something undeniably Lions-like about the way this season has unfolded. Nothing has ever come easy for this franchise. Not progress, not identity, not success, not belief. Everything has been built through struggle, through adversity, through learning how to get up after being knocked down again and again. And while that narrative has been exhausting for fans to live through, it also makes the next few weeks fascinating, because Detroit has one final chance, one last set of opportunities, to prove that they can take the punches, steady themselves, and refuse to let this season spiral into the kind of disappointment that used to define the franchise. And make no mistake, players feel this, coaches feel this. Dan Campbell, for all the criticism circling him right now, knows the weight of moments like these. He's been here as a player, he's endured it as a coach, and he understands the temperature of this fan base in a way few leaders ever have. But leadership isn't just about presence. It's about course-correcting when the details start slipping. It's about recognizing when your team is drifting away from its identity and dragging it back to center. These next few games will show us whether he can do that, whether he can pull this roster together one more time and get them playing with urgency, intelligence, and the kind of controlled aggression that made Detroit one of the most respected teams in the league not long ago. Because if the Lions come out flat, if they come out sloppy, if they come out unprepared, the doubts won't go away, they'll grow louder. And no amount of speeches or cultural strength can drown out the reality of results in the NFL. These games aren't just tests of skill or scheme. They're tests of direction, tests of leadership, tests of whether this team is closer to reclaiming its climb or closer to an offseason full of uncomfortable decisions. But here's the part fans can't forget. Nothing is predetermined. Not the collapse, not the comeback, not the narrative, not the outcome. The same team that's stumbling through the middle of the season is also the team that's shown flashes of brilliance. The team that struggled against winning teams is the same team that went toe-to-toe with the NFC's best last year. The team that looks uncertain right now is the same team that once knew exactly who it was. So the only question left, the one that will define how we look back on the 2025 season, is whether the Lions still have that spark, whether they have the fight to rewrite the story, whether the players in that locker room are willing to respond like a team that's tired of being questioned and ready to remind the league what Detroit football is supposed to look like. If you're still watching, still analyzing every moment, still riding every high and low, then make sure you're subscribed to the channel. Hit like if you want more deep dives like this, and check out the videos on screen to keep the conversation going as we track every twist of this season together. And as we carry this conversation forward, the truth becomes even clearer. This final stretch isn't just about salvaging a season, it's about defining the identity of the franchise for years to come. Because trajectories aren't shaped in moments of comfort, they're shaped in moments like this, when everything feels unstable, when expectations collide with reality, when a team is forced to answer questions it spent months trying to avoid. And right now, the Lions are standing in the middle of that storm with nowhere left to hide. What's at stake goes beyond playoff chances or standings. It's about credibility. It's about proving that last season's breakthrough wasn't a one-time spark. It's about showing the league, and this fan base, that Detroit didn't just catch lightning in a bottle, but built something that can withstand adversity. And that's why these upcoming games feel so heavy. Every mistake carries more weight. Every drive feels like a verdict. Every win or loss shifts the entire narrative in one direction or the other. Inside the building, they know that. Players can sense when pressure is rising, when the tone in meeting rooms changes, when practice is sharpened because the margin for error has evaporated. Coaches feel it too, especially Campbell, who has always been the emotional center of this team. He's not blind to the fact that this season has slipped into dangerous territory. He knows the criticism of Brad Holmes is louder than ever. He knows fans are frustrated that the same weaknesses keep resurfacing. And he knows that belief, once shaken, is hard to rebuild. Yet this is exactly the kind of moment that tests everything the Lions have said they stand for. They've talked about resilience, about grit, about responding when the world doubts them. Now the world is doubting again, but this time, the weight of expectation makes it sting even more. That's why these games against Dallas, Los Angeles, and Chicago aren't just checkpoints. They're statements. They're chances for the Lions to remind themselves, and everyone watching, that this team isn't finished, and this window isn't closing without a fight. The thing is, seasons like this have a way of revealing players who are